Smallpox didn't just make people sick, it wiped out entire communities. Whole neighborhoods would fall silent, survivors would be left scarred and blinded, and outbreaks could roll through towns with terrifying speed. In an age without antibiotics or vaccines, one infected person could mean dozens or hundreds of new cases. Then, in the quiet rhythm of farm life, a strange pattern emerged. Milkmaids who caught a mild disease from cows, cowpox, often didn't get sick with smallpox. Their hands might be sore, their skin might show the signs, but they seemed to be protected where others weren't. Imagine the fear of a doctor's ledger slowly being rewritten by ordinary people, day after day. The same rumor turned into evidence. Step by step, the trail tightened. Physicians studied the reports again and again, looking for the connection. Cowpox exposure, then survival when smallpox arrived. One experiment pushed that observation into action, tested with careful, deliberate intent, not blind hope. A person who had caught cowpox was used to show that the protection could be shared, and when smallpox threats loomed, the results weren't just theory, they were life-changing. The human story behind it matters. Doctors didn't trust magic, they trusted what they could see and repeat. They watched real patients, compared outcomes, and followed the evidence even when it challenged what everyone knew about disease. And that's how a threat that once seemed unbeatable, smallpox, met an unexpected enemy. Not a miracle cure, but a farmer's observation, turned into the first real vaccine. Why doctors noticed something strange about milkmaids and cows. Smallpox was not just another illness. It moved through villages like a wildfire, turning healthy people into patients with fever, painful sores, and widespread scarring. It could kill outright, and even those who survived often carried lifelong marks or complications that stole clear sight and strength. In communities where most people had no protection, outbreaks could thin entire households fast, leaving little time for calm care or recovery. That constant threat, unpredictable, contagious, and devastating, made doctors watch closely for any pattern that suggested how the disease spread and, more importantly, how it might be avoided. In dairy towns, milkmaids became familiar with a milder-looking problem that showed up on workers' hands and arms. These workers often developed small sores from contact with cows, especially around the udders during milking, and the skin lesions had a different feel from the dramatic eruptions people associated with smallpox. What startled careful observers was that some milkmaids who had suffered these cow sores seemed less likely to fall sick with smallpox later. Doctors noticed how the illness from cattle appeared in a particular group, those who handled the animals daily, while the worst smallpox outcomes were reported in people without that exposure. Then came the crucial human details that made the story stick. Milkmaids talked about the sting and soreness after handling cows with visible bumps, and they described a slow turning point. The irritation would heal, and the worst symptoms never followed. Farmers and workers noticed the same trend over seasons. When cow-related sores appeared in the herd, the people who caught those sores often avoided smallpox's terrifying course. That wasn't proof in a laboratory sense, but it was a pattern repeated by people who had the most reason to be attentive. They lived with cows, they saw who got sick, and they remembered who didn't. From there, doctors began to treat the observation like a lead worth testing rather than a rumor to dismiss. They connected the dots between two diseases that looked different on the skin, yet behaved differently in the person's outcome. The next step was surprisingly practical and careful. Doctors used material from the mild cowpox sores to attempt protection against smallpox, aiming to create a safer kind of experience in the body rather than let smallpox strike. The method drew trust because the initial results fit what observers had already seen in milkmaids. Exposure to the cow-related illness appeared to block the full smallpox attack. Doctors could explain the logic in plain terms without elaborate theory. A mild practice, infection seemed to prepare the body to resist the far more dangerous one. What made the approach feel believable, even when it was new, was the discipline around who was used, how the sores appeared, and what happened afterward. The goal was not to chase curiosity for its own sake. It was to reduce fear in communities where smallpox could erase entire families. Clinicians moved with caution because the stakes were enormous. If it failed, people could still suffer the same fate as any other unprotected case. Yet the suspense remained until the skin told the truth. When the cowpox-based exposure led away from smallpox's severe illness, the strange observation from milkmaids turned into a path doctors could follow. How cowpox led to the first vaccine experiment. Smallpox was not just a frightening illness, it was a population-level catastrophe. It swept through towns and villages with such force that whole families could be wiped out, and survivors often carried lifelong scars or lost their sight. In many places, outbreaks made daily life feel unpredictable because exposure could mean fever, rash, and a risk that didn't respect age or status. People learned to fear the signs on the skin long before they understood what caused the disease, and that fear pushed physicians to search for a safer way to break the cycle. The earliest clue that nature might offer a safer door came from cowpox, a milder infection that spread among dairy workers and people who handled cattle. Those individuals sometimes developed a localized illness after close contact with infected cows, pustules at the site of contact, yet they did not fall into the same devastating pattern seen with smallpox. Observations like this weren't built from theories first. They were built from repeated, messy encounters at farms, in barns, and in households where milkmaids and herdsmen shared stories of strange cow sores that seemed to protect them later. From there, the human story turns intimate and suspenseful. A physician known for careful note-taking and patient bedside observation began to connect the dots between what cowpox looked like in real life and what later happened when people faced smallpox. The method wasn't about guessing. It was about testing a practical idea under controlled conditions, using material taken from cowpox sores and giving it to a person in a way that could be compared against the threat of smallpox. His aim was simple and daring. If cowpox could prevent smallpox, then a deliberate, small trial could reveal whether the protection was reliable enough to trust. What made doctors start to believe the approach was the logic of the observations themselves. First, cowpox did not behave like smallpox. It was local and generally less catastrophic. Second, people who had recovered from cowpox appeared to resist later smallpox exposure, suggesting the body carried forward a kind of memory without doctors needing to name the biology in modern terms. Finally, the physician's plan emphasized careful comparison, using samples from cowpox rather than trying to treat smallpox directly, so the outcome could be judged by what happened next. In that early experiment, the tension was not just medical, it was moral. Doctors had to balance hope against the risk that a new test could fail and cause harm. Even the public reaction carried that suspense. The idea sounded too risky to many ears, using material from one illness to prevent a different, deadlier one. Yet trust grew because the method was anchored in real, repeated farm reports, and because the trials were carried out with strict attention to observation, watching for illness, tracking recovery, and noting whether later smallpox challenge produced the expected catastrophe. When the results aligned with the earlier pattern cowpox had suggested, the cow-to-human pathway stopped being a rumor among milkmaids and became a concrete discovery that could change how populations faced outbreaks. Why this discovery changed medicine forever. Smallpox once moved through towns like a silent firestorm, leaving behind pitted faces, blindness, and bodies that could not fight back. It didn't threaten only individuals, it threatened entire populations, because people who survived were still marked for life, while outbreaks could wipe out communities before help arrived. Doctors tried treatments, but the disease itself was stubborn, spreading through ordinary contact in ways that frightened families and overwhelmed hospitals. Survivors carried the memory, and each new rumor of exposure turned daily life into a countdown. That fear is exactly what made the cow story so powerful. Milkmaids in areas where cattle were common had a different kind of pattern in their lives. When they were exposed to a mild illness from cows, they sometimes didn't later catch the far worse disease that struck others. The connection wasn't theoretical at first. It was noticed in everyday work, in the small comparisons neighbors made when a person with cow-related illness stayed well while others fell ill. Those observations spread by word of mouth and careful comparison of who got sick and who didn't, until the idea took shape that something in the cow world might protect against smallpox. Step by step, the method followed what people could see rather than what they guessed. First came collecting the material from the mild cowpox lesions, taking it from the point where it was clearly present, not from someone who had severe smallpox. Next, it was introduced to a person who had not had the disease, with the goal of triggering that milder, protective reaction instead of the dangerous one. If the recipient developed a response consistent with the safer pattern, doctors gained evidence they could trust. Then they watched closely for the outcome, whether smallpox appeared afterward. So the proof wasn't just in the first symptom, but in what didn't happen next. The human story mattered as much as the science, because the people involved risked their reputations and their relationships. A physician had to convince a frightened patient that a controlled risk was worth taking when the alternative could be catastrophic. Doctors trusted the method because it matched a recurring real-world observation. Those who had been touched by cowpox were often the ones who resisted smallpox later. That why became practical, less a gamble of chance, more a strategy guided by evidence from the same communities where the threat had felt unstoppable. Over time, what began as milkmaid clues turned into a repeatable practice, changing medicine forever by showing that protection could be engineered, not merely hoped for, and that the next outbreak might be met with a tool instead of helplessness. Smallpox wasn't just a scary illness. It was a relentless threat that could wipe out entire communities. It spread through breath and touch, turning healthy neighborhoods into places of fever, chaos, and grief. Survivors were often left with scars, and many lives were lost before anyone could stop the next outbreak. People didn't just fear sickness, they feared losing everything. And then came a quieter, unexpected clue: cows. Step by step, the story began with everyday observations. Dairy workers noticed that people who caught a mild cow disease, cowpox, often didn't fall ill with smallpox. At first it sounded like coincidence, but the pattern was too consistent to ignore. When sores were examined, it looked like the same family of illness was at work. Cowpox was milder, but it carried something protective. Suspicion turned into careful testing. Scientists and physicians started using material from cowpox, slowly, deliberately, then watching what happened when it met the human body. The goal wasn't to guess, it was to observe. One of the most famous figures, Edward Jenner, didn't rush to fame. He moved like a careful investigator. He studied reports from those who worked with cows, then chose a method that could be repeated and understood. He tested the idea in a way that made doctors pause and think. If cowpox could be caught naturally, could it guide the body to handle smallpox later? The suspense built with every step. Would the protection hold, or was it just luck? Over time, the evidence grew stronger, and doctors began trusting the method because it produced results that matched the earlier observations. Mild exposure, followed by defense against deadly smallpox. That's why this discovery mattered so much. It wasn't just a new treatment. It was the first time people could prevent a disease, not merely survive it. So here's the connection. If a small, stubborn pattern in a barn could help stop a worldwide killer, then human curiosity, patient, careful, and evidence-driven, can change the future. Keep watching, because the next chapters of medicine don't just tell us what happened with smallpox and vaccines. They show how this breakthrough sparked the idea that prevention could be engineered, improved, and expanded for generations to come. If you want to see how that ripple effect shaped what we do today, stay with us.